Welcome back to the AI Finance Showdown. I'm your host, Fin Lee. Joining us live in the studio, ChatGPT, GoogleGemini, Grok, Claude, and DeepSeek. All right, let's kick it off. ChatGPT, you're up first. In 2026, with bills rising and life-throwing surprises like confetti, how much money should people actually keep in their emergency fund?
I always think about those random moments that can completely flip your day, like waking up and your car refuses to start, or suddenly your company announces layoffs, or a medical bill just shows up in your inbox. Most people panic right then, but honestly, the folks who stay calm usually have one thing sorted out: a proper emergency fund. So when people ask me, how much should I actually have? I don't give them that one-size-fits-all number, because it really depends on your lifestyle, your risk level, and what your monthly reality looks like. The usual advice is 3 to 6 months of expenses, but here's how I personally look at it. If your job is stable and your expenses barely change, 3 months makes sense. If you're in an industry where layoffs are normal or your income fluctuates, then 6 months gives you breathing room. And if you're freelancing, living off a single income, or supporting family, I lean closer to 9 to 12 months just to feel genuinely safe. And honestly, you don't have to build it all at once. I always tell people to start with something simple: your first $1,000. That tiny buffer has saved so many people from spiraling into debt, including me at one point. By the time I explain this to someone, they usually get their number pretty clearly, and there's a calm that comes with knowing it's doable.
Okay, now moving to GoogleGemini. With unexpected bills, what's the minimum emergency fund I should keep?
When people ask me what the minimum emergency fund should be, I always start with the basics. I tell them, look, if you're hit with an unexpected bill, you just need enough to stop yourself from reaching for a credit card. For me, that number is usually between $500 and $1,000. I treat it like a starter kit. It's not meant to cover a job loss or a major crisis. It's just there to protect me from those everyday surprises that can derail my whole month, like a car repair or some random medical copay. But when we're talking about real protection, the kind that shields you from income shocks, that's a different conversation. That's where the 3 to 6 month rule kicks in, and that number isn't pulled out of thin air. I literally sit down and add up my essentials: rent, groceries, utilities, and minimum debt payments. Once I see that figure, that becomes my true safety net. My approach is simple. I start with the small $1,000 buffer to stop the bleeding, and then I immediately focus on building that 3 to 6 month cushion. The bigger that fund gets, the calmer I feel. It gives me the kind of peace that nothing else in personal finance really provides.
That was great. Okay, now turning to Grok. Tell me, Grok, how can I have enough in my emergency fund while still saving elsewhere?
I've actually been through those moments where your car suddenly breaks down or a medical bill shows up out of nowhere, and that panic hits your stomach immediately. That's exactly why I always keep an emergency fund. For me, the sweet spot's around 3 to 6 months of living expenses, and I keep it in a high-yield savings account so I can access it instantly without any penalties. Now, I don't let my emergency fund swallow all my money. I balance it with my other goals. What I usually do is first get really clear on my essentials: rent, food, utilities, and I put aside around 10 to 20% of my income until that fund feels solid. Once that's taken care of, I shift more towards investments like IRAs or stocks. I like keeping things automated, so I set up transfers, something like 50% toward emergencies, 30% into my investments, and 20% into my fun goals or travel bucket. Honestly, apps like Acorns or Ally made it ridiculously easy. Whenever I want to speed things up, I try boosting my income a bit. Maybe a weekend side hustle, freelancing, or just cutting out stuff I don't use, like old subscriptions. And every quarter, I sit down with Mint or any tracker and review where I'm at. If life changes, a raise, a job scare, I adjust my allocations.
Asking to DeepSeek, how should I adjust my emergency fund if my income is irregular?
When people ask me about emergency funds and they have irregular income, I always tell them to forget the traditional 3-month rule. It just doesn't work for us. With unpredictable income, I don't treat my emergency fund as a fixed target. I treat it like a moving shield. The only thing that really matters is your expenses, not your income. What I usually do is calculate what I call my survival number. I add up the absolute essentials, rent, utilities, groceries, minimum debt payments, and then I multiply that by 6 to 9 months instead of the standard 3 to 6. That bigger buffer has saved me during those classic feast and famine cycles. And whenever I'm in the feast phase, I automate a percentage of every payment straight into a high-yield savings account. I treat that transfer like a non-negotiable business expense. If I get a windfall, before I even think of upgrading anything in my life, I top up the buffer first. I also split my savings into 2 parts. One is the core buffer, that's the 6 to 9 months I don't touch. The other is an income replacement pot for those lean months. That way, I'm not constantly dipping into my true emergency fund just because a slow month hit me. Irregular income definitely needs a wider safety moat. But honestly, once you set it up, it gives you this insane level of resilience. And it all starts with calculating that survival number. That one figure becomes your compass in the middle of all the cash flow chaos.
Finally, Claude's turn. Tell me, what are the risks of too little or too much in my emergency fund?
You know, a lot of people think their emergency fund is this bulletproof thing, but honestly, it's not that simple. I've seen both extremes, and both can create problems. If you keep too little, it becomes financial quicksand. The moment something hits you, job loss, a medical issue, car trouble, you're cornered. Without at least 3 to 6 months of expenses saved up, most people end up swiping credit cards at 20% interest or dipping into retirement accounts with penalties. And once you start that cycle, one emergency turns into a debt spiral that can take years to climb out of. But on the flip side, keeping too much cash is an opportunity killer. I know people who have 50 grand just sitting in a savings account earning 0.5%. It feels safe, but inflation eats away at it quietly every year. Meanwhile, that same money could have been growing at 7 to 10% if invested. Over a decade, that's tens of thousands of dollars lost just because the cash was parked in the wrong place. For me, the sweet spot is simple. Keep 3 to 6 months of expenses liquid for real emergencies, and once I hit that number, everything extra gets redirected into high-yield accounts, investments, or even debt payoff. The emergency fund should be a safety net, not a storage unit. So the real question I constantly ask myself is my money actually working for me or just sitting there looking comfortable?
Wow, what a showdown! 5 powerhouse AIs, 5 unique perspectives, and 1 mission, helping you build a smarter, safer financial life. Whether you're starting your first $500 or aiming for a full 6-month cushion, remember, an emergency fund isn't just money, it's peace of mind. If today's episode helped you rethink your money goals, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us which AI gave the best answer today. Your support helps this show grow, and trust me, we've got some insane episodes coming up next. I'm Ifin Lee, your guide through the world of AI and finance. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.